A spider monkey cried by the river. What he was protecting changed everything. The water still beat hard against the exposed roots when the spider monkey emerged on the flooded bank, his long limbs trembling as he tried to steady himself on ground that slipped like wet soap beneath his weight. His dark fur hung heavy, plastered to his thin frame, and each drop that fell from his face mixed with the muffled sound escaping his throat, not a human cry, but a pulsing, irregular lament, so deep it seemed to rise from within the forest itself. He clutched something against his chest, small, fragile, almost invisible between his thin arms. The current of the Madeira River had swollen with rain and advanced like a silent beast, snapping branches, tearing leaves, swallowing the bank centimeter by centimeter, and there, on that narrow line between earth and water, the spider monkey was about to lose everything, again. The smell of churned earth saturated the humid air, mixed with the odor of leaves crushed by the storm. The canopy above filtered light in green and gold tones, creating spots that danced across the animal's body as he moved with contained urgency. But there was fear in every gesture, not the immediate fear of the water, nor of the distant thunder still echoing between the trunks. It was an older fear almost carved into the tendons of his arms, the memory of when, still young, he had watched his mother disappear into the dark waters during a sudden flood. He didn't understand the memory as we understand. He felt it in the muscles that locked, in the short breathing, in the panic that rose like fever whenever the river passed its natural limit. And now, with the infant he carried, not his blood, but still his burden, that panic gained even denser contours. The rain had started 3 days before, when the sky turned the color of wet slate and stayed that way. The drops fell so thick they seemed to form walls between the trees. The spider monkey had climbed higher then, seeking shelter in the dense crown of a kapok tree, but the infant's weight made every movement precarious. The little one couldn't grip properly yet, his tiny fingers sliding off branches, his body going limp when exhaustion overtook him. So the adult had wrapped his long tail around a sturdy limb and held the infant close, feeling the rapid heartbeat against his own chest, feeling the small body shiver despite the tropical heat that hung even through the storm. The forest, however, gave him no time for reflection. Sounds exploded around him, the crack of yielding trunks, the interrupted song of birds, the metallic cry of macaws flying low in alert. And behind everything, there was a deeper sound, muffled, that made his chest vibrate, a growl that had earlier dispersed his group among the highest crowns. The jaguar was close. The humid wind carried the strong smell of wet fur and living flesh, revealing that she prowled the bank in search of what remained from the attack. The spider monkey knew he wouldn't have a second chance if she found him there. Even so, he pressed the infant against his chest, as if his own warmth could erase the smell of the small one's vulnerability. The fragility of that tiny body, still with uncoordinated movements, unable to hold on alone, was what made everything more urgent and more painful. The morning light had barely penetrated the storm clouds when he'd first heard the jaguar's approach. Not the sound itself, but the absence of sound, the way the constant chatter of small birds suddenly stopped, the way even the insects seemed to hold their breath. He had frozen then, high in the branches, watching the spotted shadow move below with fluid grace. She was hunting, her belly lean with hunger, and she had already caught the scent of his group. The attack came fast. 2 of the older monkeys had screamed warnings, their voices sharp and panicked, and the troop scattered in every direction. He had run too, the infant clinging weakly to his chest, but in his haste, he had descended too low, seeking speed over safety. Now the flood had cut off his escape route, and the jaguar had circled back. The water continued to rise. It crept up the roots, swallowed the lower brush, turned solid ground into treacherous mud. The spider monkey shifted his weight, testing each foothold before committing, but the infant's added mass threw off his natural balance. His kind were built for the canopy, for swinging through space with arms that could span 2 meters when fully extended. Here on the slick ground he was clumsy, vulnerable. The infant whimpered, a thin sound that pierced through the rain's constant drum. The adult responded by grooming the small head with quick, nervous movements, his fingers combing through wet fur, trying to provide comfort even as his own body trembled with exhaustion and fear. When the jaguar finally emerged between 2 roots, her body was a living shadow, fluid, almost silent. Only the slightest sound of water against her paws betrayed her approach. The filtered light through the leaves created golden reflections on her spotted coat, making her seem part of the forest itself. The spider monkey didn't move immediately, not from courage, but from absolute paralysis. His breathing accelerated, his chest rose in spasm, his long fingers trembled. He didn't know how to protect two lives at the same time, his own and the one he carried. And it was this hesitation, so raw and so animal, that made that instant unbearably human for anyone who might observe it. The jaguar paused, her yellow eyes fixed on the monkey. Her body was coiled with potential energy, muscles bunched beneath wet fur, tail twitching with predatory focus. She was perhaps 3 meters away, close enough that the spider monkey could see the individual whiskers on her muzzle, the slight twitch of her ears tracking every sound. Her mouth hung slightly open, revealing teeth designed for crushing vertebrae. She took one slow step forward, testing the monkey's reaction, gauging whether her prey would flee or freeze. The spider monkey's mind, if it could be called that, this collection of instinct and learned response, raced through possibilities. Running would trigger the chase reflex. He had seen it before, when younger members of his troop had panicked and bolted. The jaguar's acceleration was explosive, her body capable of reaching full speed in 3 bounds. She could leap 2.5 meters straight up, could snatch a monkey from a low branch before the victim even registered movement. His only advantages were height and agility, but both were compromised now. The infant made climbing slow, the wet bark would provide poor grip, and the jaguar was patient. But there was something else in the monkey's paralysis, something deeper than tactical calculation. The memory came in fragments, not as pictures, but as sensations. The feeling of his mother's grip loosening, the cold shock of floodwater closing over his small body, the desperate, futile struggle as the current pulled him under, and then, impossibly, pushed him up into an eddy where a fallen log had caught him. He had clung there half-drowned, crying for his mother while the flood carried her away. For 3 days he had stayed on that log, too terrified to move, surviving on rainwater and insects, until an older female from another group had found him and, through some instinct he still didn't understand, had brought him back to the troop. That fear lived in his body now, a permanent resident. Whenever water rose above its banks, whenever rain fell too hard for too long, his muscles would lock, his breathing would shallow, and he would feel the cold certainty that the river was coming to finish what it had started. The infant against his chest shifted, its tiny hands gripping his fur with surprising strength for something so fragile. The movement broke through his paralysis, his breathing slowed marginally. The jaguar took another step closer. The rain began to ease slightly, changing from a roar to a steady hiss. Through the canopy, patches of lighter sky appeared, still grey, but no longer the ominous black of the storm's peak. The change in light altered the forest's mood subtly, colours brightened by half a shade. The constant drip from leaves created a new rhythm, almost musical. The spider monkey's ears twitched, processing sounds, the jaguar's breathing low and steady, the infant's faster heartbeat, the creak of bending branches, the rush of the river behind him, swollen and angry. But then, something unexpected cut through the tension like a tear in the atmosphere itself. A scarlet macaw descended in a low flight, landing on a branch between predator and prey. The wet feathers gleamed like living embers against the green background. Its call echoed through the valley in a strident cry, repeated insistently, as if trying to distract the jaguar or announce to the rest of the forest the tragedy about to happen. The macaw didn't attack, didn't launch itself at the feline, but it occupied that space with such audacity, such noise, such color, that for a brief instant the feline looked away. That instant was worth a life. The macaw's appearance was so sudden, so vivid, that even the jaguar seemed momentarily confused by it. The bird was old. You could see it in the way certain feathers didn't lie quite flat, in the slight dulling of color around its eyes. Its beak bore scars from past conflicts, and one foot gripped the branch with particular care, suggesting an old injury that had never quite healed right. But its voice was strong, filling the space with harsh, commanding syllables that seemed designed to carry for miles through the dense forest. The jaguar's head swiveled toward this new presence. Her ears flattened slightly, not in fear but in irritation. Macaws were too large to bother hunting, too aggressive to corner easily, and their beaks could inflict serious damage if provoked. More importantly, their calls often attracted attention from other creatures. A jaguar's hunting strategy relied on stealth, on the element of surprise, and this bird was destroying both. The feline's tail lashed once, a sign of frustration, and she shifted her weight, torn between the known prey before her and the noisy intruder above. The spider monkey's paralysis broke, not into flight, but into awareness. His eyes, which had been fixed on the jaguar's face, now darted to the sides, calculating. The macaw continued its raucous display, hopping along the branch, wings half spread to make itself look larger. It wasn't defending the monkey. Macaws didn't form alliances with primates, but they did respond to predators in their territory, especially during nesting season. The bird was likely protecting a nest somewhere nearby, and the jaguar's presence had triggered its defensive behavior. The spider monkey didn't understand this reasoning, but he understood opportunity. The infant against his chest had gone completely still, responding to its carrier's tension with its own instinctive freeze response. The tiny heart hammered like a hummingbird's wing. Its eyes were barely open, still clouded with the blue-gray of newborn vision, but its hands gripped the adult's fur with desperate strength. The spider monkey adjusted his hold, shifting the infant lower against his abdomen, freeing his hands slightly. His long arms, each nearly as long as his entire body, began to move with cautious deliberation. The macaw shrieked again, this time flying forward, actually positioning itself between the jaguar and the monkey. It was a bold move, possibly foolish. The feline's eyes tracked the bird's flight, pupils dilating as the predatory instinct kicked in. For a heartbeat, she seemed to consider leaping for the bird instead. Her haunches bunched, her weight shifted backward onto her rear legs. The spider monkey saw this shift and understood it the way prey animals understand predators, not through thought, but through a million years of survival instinct encoded in his species' memory. The spider monkey pulled back one step. The mud gave way. He fell onto a toppled trunk, and the impact tore a guttural sound from him, almost a sob. But he kept the infant whole against his chest, protecting the head with his forearm. The macaw screamed again, this time flying forward between the jaguar and the monkey, creating enough movement to confuse the feline. The jaguar advanced half a step, evaluating the scene, not just with hunger, but with that ancestral caution of predators when they sense the environment has changed around them. The forest, in a way, seemed to act as a second witness, and the jaguar, after some long seconds, retreated slightly, like one who decides to wait. This simple gesture, an almost imperceptible retreat, gave the monkey the space he needed to escape. The fallen trunk was ancient, its wood softened by decades of rain and fungal decay. When the monkey hit it, his weight actually created a shallow depression in the rotting surface. Pieces of bark flaked off, revealing the white network of mycelium beneath. The smell of decomposition intensified, that rich, dark scent of organic matter breaking down, recycling itself into the forest's eternal cycle. Termites scattered from the impact, their pale bodies visible for a moment before they disappeared into crevices. The monkey's ribs ached from the fall. Not broken, but bruised, sending sharp signals with each breath. His right leg had twisted slightly, and when he put weight on it, the joint protested with a hot grinding sensation, but he couldn't stop. The jaguar's retreat was temporary, a strategic pause rather than a surrender. She had moved perhaps 2 meters back, her body still coiled, still ready. Her ears were forward again, tracking the macaw, but keeping the monkey in her peripheral vision. She was calculating, weighing the energy expenditure of pursuit against the certainty of a meal. The infant whimpered again, its voice stronger now, approaching a cry. The sound cut through the rain, and the macaw's calls like a blade. It was the universal sound of a baby in distress, and it triggered something deep in the monkey's body. Not conscious thought, but a fierce, overwhelming compulsion to protect. His grip tightened reflexively. His eyes scanned the terrain with new urgency, looking for any route of escape that wouldn't leave them exposed. The river was to his left, swollen and brown with runoff. The current moved fast enough that eddies formed behind submerged obstacles, creating spinning vortexes of foam and debris. Branches swept past, whole trees sometimes, their root systems rising above the water like the fingers of drowning giants. The sound was immense, a deep thrumming roar that made the ground vibrate subtly beneath the monkey's feet. Swimming would be suicide. But there, perhaps 10 meters downstream, a large log had caught against a standing tree. It formed a precarious bridge of sorts, and beyond it the ground rose slightly out of the flood zone. The jaguar saw the monkey's gaze shift toward the water. She understood the intention before he moved, her body responding with predatory anticipation. She began to circle, positioning herself between the monkey and any retreat back into the forest, forcing him toward the water. It was a calculated tactic: drive the prey into an environment where it was even more vulnerable, then strike when exhaustion made resistance impossible. The macaw, sensing the shift in dynamics, flew higher, its calls changing to a different pattern, shorter, more rapid bursts. Other birds began to respond. A group of parakeets erupted from a nearby tree, their green bodies flashing through the grey air. A toucan added its croaking voice to the chorus. The forest's alarm system was activating, spreading the news of the predator's presence. These sounds wouldn't save the monkey directly, but they created a background of chaos, of distraction, that might buy precious seconds. He threw himself toward the water, not to swim, but to reach a semi-submerged trunk that the current dragged slowly, caught by underwater roots. The icy water struck his chest with brutality. His long arms, built to fly between branches and not to face turbulent rivers, trembled as they sought support. The infant, soaked, released a weak sound, almost a plea for help, and the forest reacted. The rain suddenly decreased, leaving a smell of crushed flowers and deep humus in the air. The light changed, became more golden, more filtered, softer, as if time slowed just for him. The cold was shocking in its intensity. Despite the tropical heat that hung in the air even through the storm, the floodwater was shockingly cold, fed by rainfall from high elevations where temperatures dropped at night. The spider monkey gasped involuntarily as it enveloped his lower body, the shock making his muscles seize momentarily. The infant shrieked, a high, thin sound of distress that pierced straight through the adult's chest. Its tiny body convulsed, trying to pull away from the cold, but the monkey's grip was iron. He would drown before he let go. The current immediately began to work on him, pulling at his legs, trying to sweep his feet from under him. The mud beneath offered no purchase. It was liquid itself, more suspension than solid ground. His toes curled, seeking any irregularity, any rock or root that might provide anchor. His long tail, usually used for balance in the canopy, whipped around seeking something to wrap around, but found only water and empty air. The log he'd spotted was moving, not quickly but with inexorable force. It was caught against the standing tree, yes, but the pressure of water and debris building up behind it was immense. Eventually, something would give. Either the log would break free, or the tree would topple. The monkey had perhaps seconds to reach it before the dynamic changed. He lunged forward, letting the current help him, using it rather than fighting it. His right hand shot out and grabbed a protruding branch stub on the log's surface. The impact nearly dislocated his shoulder, but he held on. Behind him, the jaguar had reached the water's edge. She stood there, her paws just touching the floodline, her body language uncertain. Jaguars were strong swimmers, stronger than most big cats, but even she respected the power of a flood-stage river. She paced along the bank, watching the monkey struggle, calculating. If he fell, if the current swept him away, she might still catch him downstream. But the risk was significant. The macaw continued its aerial patrol, flying in wide circles above. Its calls had changed again, becoming almost rhythmic, like a heartbeat. The bird's shadow passed over the water, over the struggling monkey, over the watching jaguar. In some unconscious way, the macaw was mapping the drama, keeping track of all the players, ready to respond if the situation shifted again. The spider monkey pulled himself onto the log with every ounce of strength his lean frame possessed. His arm muscles burned with lactic acid. His breathing came in ragged gasps. Water streamed from his fur, making him look even thinner, almost skeletal. The infant was plastered against his chest, its small body shivering violently. He could feel its heart racing, feel its shallow, rapid breaths. The little one was in shock from the cold and the trauma, its fragile system pushed to its limits. The crossing was slow. With every meter, branches tore at the water's surface. Trunks descended like arrows. Whirlpools opened black holes between the roots. But the monkey advanced, meter by meter, using everything his body could offer. Long legs to hold purchase, arms that stretched beyond possible, clenched teeth, short breathing. He didn't look back, but the macaw did. It flew above, getting closer and closer, screaming to warn about loose trunks, descending in quick curves when something came in the monkey's direction. It wasn't friendship. It wasn't consciousness. It was the forest functioning as a living network, where each species feels the imbalance of others. The log shifted beneath him as he crawled along its length. The bark was slick with algae and moss, offering almost no grip. His fingers, designed for grasping branches, struggled to find purchase on the round surface. He moved in an awkward forward motion, using his tail for balance, his hind legs pushing while his arms pulled. Progress was measured in hand-widths. Each movement had to be calculated, tested, committed to with full faith that the log wouldn't suddenly roll or break free. The infant had gone quiet again. Not peaceful, but the quiet of extreme exhaustion. Its small chest rose and fell rapidly, using energy it didn't have to maintain body temperature against the cold and wet. The monkey paused in his crawl, adjusted his grip, and used one hand to groom the infant's head in quick, urgent strokes. It was an instinctive behavior, meant to soothe, to bond, to communicate safety, even when everything screamed danger. The water around them was thick with debris. Leaves formed floating mats, sometimes so dense they looked like solid ground until you touched them. Branches spun in the current, some sharp enough to puncture. Somewhere upstream, a section of bamboo came loose, the hollow tubes creating strange whistling sounds as water rushed through them. The noise was eerie, almost musical, adding another layer to the forest's symphony of flood and survival. The macaw dove suddenly, its warning cry sharp and urgent. The spider monkey froze, pressing himself flat against the log. A massive tree trunk swept past, its root ball rising 2 meters above the water's surface. If it had struck the log he was on, it would have shattered both wood and monkey. The wake it created rocked the log violently, and for a moment the monkey felt his grip slipping. His fingers scrambled for purchase. The infant's weight shifted, threatening to unbalance him. His tail wrapped around a stub of branch, taking his weight for a crucial second while he regained his hold. The macaw landed on the standing tree that anchored the log, its bright form stark against the dark wood. It ruffled its feathers, shedding water in a brief spray of droplets that caught the filtered light. The bird cocked its head, watching the monkey's progress with what might have been curiosity, might have been simple instinct. Its eyes were ancient, carrying the intelligence of a species that had survived in these forests for millions of years. It called once more, softer now, a different vocalization, almost conversational. The standing tree was dying. The monkey could smell it as he drew closer, that particular scent of inner rot, of heartwood turning soft and punky. The tree had probably been damaged months or even years ago, wounded by lightning or disease, and had been slowly dying ever since. The flood had simply accelerated its end. Even as he watched, a chunk of outer bark peeled away, revealing the sickly pale wood beneath. The tree shuddered slightly, settling deeper into the mud, but it held. For now, it held. The monkey reached the point where log met tree and faced a moment of decision. The tree's trunk rose at a steep angle, its surface interrupted by broken branch stubs and patches of moss. Climbing it while carrying the infant would be difficult, but beyond it, he could see higher ground, real ground above the floodline, with living trees whose roots still gripped solid earth. Behind him, across the growing expanse of water, the jaguar still watched. She had moved downstream, keeping pace with his crossing, her golden eyes never leaving him. She was too far away now for a successful attack, but her presence remained, a constant reminder of the threat. The monkey knew, with the certainty of instinct, that she would remember this. Jaguars had long memories. If their territories overlapped, she would recognize his scent next time, would remember that he had escaped once, and would be even more determined the second time. The macaw lifted off from its perch, circling once, then flying toward the far bank. It landed in a tall cecropia tree, its distinctive white-barked trunk rising like a lighthouse above the surrounding vegetation. The bird called again, and this time other macaws answered, a pair, their voices harmonizing briefly before falling silent. The first macaw had a mate then, and likely chicks. That explained its aggressive behavior, its willingness to harass a jaguar. It was defending its territory, its genetic investment in the next generation. The spider monkey began to climb. The tree's bark was soft enough that his fingers could actually dig in, creating small holds where none existed naturally. His muscles screamed in protest. The bruise on his ribs sent sharp pains with every breath. His twisted leg throbbed with each push upward, but he climbed because there was no other option, because stopping meant death for both him and the fragile life he protected. When he finally reached a solid rock on the other side, the spider monkey collapsed to his knees. His entire body trembled. Breathing came in waves, as if each gasp was the first air he'd breathed since the attack. The infant, though weak, moved against his chest, seeking warmth. The macaw landed nearby, tilting its head, evaluating the small creature with attentive curiosity. The jaguar from the other side of the river still watched, but the distance had increased and the water between them was now barrier enough. The rock was granite, part of the ancient shield that formed the Amazon basin's foundation. It was perhaps 3 meters across, flat on top, rising just high enough above the flood that water lapped at its edges without covering it. The surface was covered in a thin film of green algae, slippery but manageable. Small puddles had collected in natural depressions, creating tiny reflecting pools that caught the sky. The monkey sat heavily, his legs folding beneath him, his body finally allowing itself to acknowledge exhaustion. His breathing gradually slowed from desperate gasps to deep, shuddering inhales. His heart rate, which had been hammering at crisis levels for the past hour, began to ease back toward normal. His hands moved automatically, checking the infant, grooming it with quick, gentle touches, counting its tiny fingers and toes, assessing for injuries. The infant was alive, hypothermic, traumatized, but alive. Its small body continued to shiver, but the shivering was actually a good sign. It meant the body was still trying to generate heat, still fighting. The monkey pulled the infant closer, tucking it against his warmest spots, under his arm, against his ribcage, where his own body heat was most concentrated. He curled his body around it, creating a living shelter. The macaw hopped closer on the rock, its movements cautious but curious. It was perhaps half a meter away now, close enough that the monkey could see the individual barbules on its feathers, could see the slight dulling of its eye color that suggested age. The bird extended its neck, its beak moving within striking distance of the infant. The monkey tensed, his protective instinct flaring, but the macaw's movements weren't aggressive. It was simply observing, trying to understand what this small creature was. The infant turned its head toward the macaw, its tiny eyes struggling to focus. It made a small sound, not quite a cry, more like a chirp. The macaw responded with a soft, clicking noise, a vocalization so different from its earlier harsh calls that it seemed to come from a different bird entirely. For a moment, the two creatures, infant primate and ancient bird, regarded each other with mutual incomprehension and interest. The rain had stopped completely now. The clouds were breaking up, allowing shafts of sunlight to pierce through the canopy. Where the light struck the water, it created patches of brilliant sparkle, almost too bright to look at directly. Steam began to rise from the soaked vegetation as the sun's heat met the moisture, creating a thin mist that softened the edges of everything. The forest smelled of ozone and life, of growth and decay happening simultaneously, of the endless cycle turning. The spider monkey didn't move from the rock for a long time. His body needed rest, needed time to process the adrenaline, to begin the slow work of repair. His bruised ribs ached with every breath. His twisted leg had stiffened, the joint swelling slightly where he'd wrenched it. Small cuts and scrapes decorated his hands and feet, souvenirs from rough bark and sharp branches. But he was whole. Against all odds, he was whole. The infant began to warm slowly. Its shivering decreased in intensity, becoming occasional rather than constant. Its breathing deepened, settling into something approaching normal infant respiration. Its tiny fingers maintained their grip on the adult's fur, but the desperation had eased. The monkey groomed it methodically, removing bits of debris, straightening wet fur, providing comfort through touch the way his species had for millions of years. The macaw eventually flew away, rising into the canopy with powerful wing beats. Its calls faded into the distance, becoming just another voice in the forest's constant conversation. But before it left, it had circled the rock 3 times, had landed briefly on the infant's head, so gently that the baby didn't even flinch, and had called once more a long melodic sound that might have been greeting or farewell or simple acknowledgement. The jaguar disappeared more gradually. For nearly an hour she remained visible across the water, her spotted form moving through the flooded undergrowth, keeping pace with the monkey even as he rested. But eventually the distance grew too great, the obstacle too significant, and she melted back into the forest. Her hunting had failed today, which meant she would be hungrier tomorrow, more desperate. Somewhere in her territory, she would make another kill. The forest would provide, it always did for both predator and prey, maintaining the balance through countless small deaths and narrow escapes. As the sun rose higher, insects emerged. First the mosquitoes, sensing mammal warmth and carbon dioxide, their high whine joining the ambient sound. The monkey's tail flicked automatically, swatting them away from the infant's exposed skin. Then came the butterflies, brilliant morphos whose electric blue wings seemed to glow from within, small yellows that clustered around the puddles on the rock seeking minerals, and one massive owl butterfly whose eye spots on closed wings made it look like a watching predator. And then came the revelation, not as dramatic impact, but as silent understanding. That infant didn't belong to his group. It was orphaned from a female of another distant family, killed weeks earlier by predators. The males of his troop had rejected the small one, expelling it from the canopy. The spider monkey had found it alone days later, and for reasons he didn't understand rationally but felt in his bones, had refused to abandon it. He had fed it, warmed it, carried it. What he protected at the river's edge was not just a newborn, it was a chance to interrupt the cycle that had marked him since youth. A life that wasn't his had given him the opportunity to reframe his own pain. The memory of finding the infant came back in fragments as the monkey rested. It had been 4 days ago, when he was foraging alone in the lower canopy, seeking the young leaves that his species preferred. He had heard crying, not the normal chatter of his troop, but a thin, desperate wail that triggered something primal in his response. Following the sound, he had found the infant clinging to a low branch, its small body already showing signs of dehydration and starvation. The proper response, by all the rules of Spider Monkey Society, would have been to leave it. Resources were precious. Territory was contested. An orphan from another group represented competition without kinship bonds to justify the investment. The dominant males in his troop had made this clear repeatedly, driving away outsiders, sometimes killing infants that weren't their own, to bring females back into breeding conditions sooner. But he had picked it up anyway, had pressed it against his chest, had felt its heart beating against his own, had recognized something in that helpless trembling that bypassed all logic and strategy. He had lost his mother to the river. This infant had lost its mother to the jaguar. The specifics were different, but the essence was the same. Life cut short, protection withdrawn, vulnerability exposed to a world that didn't care. For 4 days he had cared for it in secret, feeding it with pre-chewed fruit, keeping it warm through the cold nights, hiding it from the other males who would have killed it without hesitation. The infant's original group was unknown to him. Their scent was wrong, suggesting they ranged in territory to the south, perhaps 2 or 3 kilometers away. The mother had probably been caught during a range expansion, killed when she wandered too far seeking new food sources. The infant would never know its mother, would never learn the specific calls and grooming patterns of its birth family. If it survived, if he could keep it alive long enough to grow strong, it would be raised in his group's traditions, would learn his calls, would think of itself as part of his lineage. In a way, he was stealing a future from the infant's original family, but that family was already lost. What remained was just this: warmth, protection, the chance to grow. The sun climbed higher, turning the rock into a warm platform. The heat felt good against the monkey's chilled body. His fur began to dry, fluffing out gradually, restoring the insulation that had been compressed by water and pressure. The infant's fur dried faster, being finer, and soon the little one looked less like a drowned rat and more like an actual monkey, tiny, impossibly delicate, but undeniably alive. The spider monkey's thoughts, if they could be called thoughts, circled around the question of what came next. The flood had displaced them significantly from familiar territory. The jaguar's attack had scattered his troop, and he didn't know where they were now, whether they had regrouped in some traditional gathering place, or whether they remained scattered, each individual seeking safety separately. The infant complicated everything. Carrying it slowed him down, made him vulnerable, broadcast his position to any predator with functioning senses. The logical choice would be to abandon it, to set it down on this rock, to climb back into the canopy alone, to return to his troop and resume his normal life. The infant would die, certainly, from exposure or predation or simple starvation, but that death was inevitable anyway. Spider monkeys had low survival rates for infants even under ideal conditions, with mothers who could nurse them properly and troop support for protection. An orphan carried by an unrelated male had essentially zero chance of reaching adulthood, but he didn't put it down. His hands, when they moved to adjust the infant's position, to make it more comfortable, to check its breathing and temperature. His body, without conscious direction, remained curled around the small form, providing shelter. His eyes scanned the surrounding forest, not for escape routes, but for signs of danger that might threaten them both. Something had changed in him, though he lacked the framework to understand what. The flood, the jaguar, the macaw's intervention, the desperate crossing. These events had welded him to the infant in ways that transcended biology or social structure. He had nearly died protecting this small life, had made choices that defied self-preservation, had discovered that his capacity for care extended beyond genetic relatedness. In human terms, we might call it love, or responsibility, or redemption. But the spider monkey didn't think in these terms. He only knew that when he looked at the infant, when he felt its small body breathing against his chest, something in him settled into rightness. The hole that his mother's death had carved in his existence, that howling void of sudden loss, had found a kind of answer in this tiny creature's need. By saving it, he was saving something in himself. The Amazon, reflected in the now calm water, seemed to confirm this change. The air smelled of rebirth. The canopy let light fall like a blessing on the two bodies huddled on the rock. The macaw opened its wings, letting scarlet brilliance tear through the humid air. And the spider monkey, exhausted but whole, finally breathed without fear, as if understanding in his own heartbeat's rhythm that he had saved more than one life. He had saved himself. The forest's voice changed as afternoon approached. The morning's chaos of storm and flood gave way to a different soundscape, more orderly, more musical. Birds resumed their territorial songs. Insects tuned up their constant drone, and from somewhere distant came the whooping call of howler monkeys claiming their range. Life reasserting itself after the disruption, the pattern reforming, the network reconnecting. The water level had begun to drop. Not dramatically, but visibly. The rock's base was now exposed by several more centimeters, and the current had lost some of its earlier violence. The flood was passing, draining away into the Madeira's vast system, dispersing across the basin. By tomorrow, the smaller tributaries would be navigable again. By next week, only the high water marks on tree trunks would remain as evidence of this day's drama. The spider monkey finally stood, testing his injured leg. It hurt, but it held his weight. The bruised ribs protested, but didn't prevent movement. He was functional, if not fully recovered. He adjusted the infant one more time, securing it against his chest in a position that would allow him to climb. The little one stirred, made a small sound, not distress, but something closer to contentment. It had accepted this new carrier, had bonded to this warmth and heartbeat. He looked back once toward the far bank where the jaguar had been. Nothing moved there now except the endless drip of water from leaves, the gentle sway of disturbed vegetation. The predator was gone, hunting elsewhere, her memory of him already fading into the background static of her territorial knowledge. They might meet again someday, or they might not. The forest was vast enough for countless stories to unfold simultaneously without intersection. Then he climbed, not quickly, not with his former fluid grace, but steadily, methodically, each handhold tested before trusted. He moved into the canopy, into the green cathedral where his kind had lived for uncounted generations. The infant clung to him, its grip strengthening as it warmed and recovered. Above them, the leaves filtered sunlight into 100 shades of green and gold. Below, the water continued its ancient work of reshaping the land. In the days that would follow, the spider monkey would face new challenges. The infant would need constant care, feeding every few hours, warmth through the cold nights, protection from the countless threats that filled the forest. His troop might accept the orphan, or they might not. Other males might challenge his choice, might try to kill the infant to eliminate competition. Every day would bring decisions, small acts of protection, moments where survival hung in balance. But for now, in this moment, suspended in the canopy with the infant secure against his chest and the forest singing its eternal song around him, there was only peace. The monkey's body remembered the flood, the jaguar's eyes, the cold grip of the current, but it also remembered the macaw's intervention, the feel of solid rock beneath exhausted limbs, the tiny heartbeat that had given him purpose when he had every reason to give up. He was a survivor. They both were. And in a forest where survival was the highest achievement, where the gap between life and death measured in seconds and centimeters, that was enough. That was everything. The light shifted as clouds moved overhead, creating moving patterns on the forest floor below. A troop of parakeets swept past, their green forms disappearing into the upper canopy. The distant thunder of the river faded into background music, and the spider monkey, with his unlikely charge, moved deeper into the maze of branches, seeking food, seeking safety, seeking whatever tomorrow would bring.